You're listening to One Free Family, a new take on peaceful parenting, where you can hear ideas for helping to raise free, independent, and peaceful children. Visit onefreefamily.com to connect and listen. Here are your hosts, James and Taylor Davis.
And we're back with another episode of One Free Family. This is James.
And Taylor.
And we're excited to chat with you all again today because we've been having a lot of really raucous conversations around the house.
That sounded so weird.
Don't look so surprised. These conversations have been raucous, I will say so.
I don't like when you say that word.
Well, I'm going to say it more from now on. About this whole idea of self-directed learning. And the more we sit with it and do it in our own home, and I'm doing it more these days at Big Fish, the Liberated Learner Center here in the town we live in, I feel like I gain more clarity around it, but I also see the nuances. Like I can see the depth and how tricky it can feel sometimes to try to really support kids through the process of staying self-directed in their lives and maintaining their ability to pursue life in a self-directed way, while also feeling like I'm taking an active role in really meeting my responsibilities for them as their caregiver.
Yeah, I think that one thing that can make this kind of approach to living with children so hard is that there's really no script for supporting kids to be self-directed in their lives and in their learning, because what most of us know, and the only thing most of us have ever known, is the traditional education paradigm. And so there is totally a script for that. And we want a script. I think we're kind of programmed to be comfortable when we know what to do. And supporting kids to be self-directed is really good for throwing you really far outside of your comfort zone. And you have to figure it out for yourself, and you have to figure out what's going to work for you and your family. But I do think that there are certain things that really, like, that we're finding really do support kids to be self-directed learners, and other things that don't, even if we mean well. I think there's some things that I have definitely done and sometimes probably still continue to do that kind of undermine that. And so I think today we just kind of want to bring some of the conversations we've been having between each other just to light, and maybe share some ideas, and also probably raise some more questions that we don't yet have the answers to.
Absolutely. I think today it's going to be a lot about trying to really dig in and answer hard questions, like how do you support someone without making them dependent upon your support? How do you, when you are interacting with someone, how can you help them along their journey without telling them where they should go? Like, these are actually, I think, really challenging questions. It's been a huge topic of discussion over at Big Fish among the staff recently, where it's kind of like parenting, but at a much larger scale, because we have like 25 or 30 kids in our charge. And these are kids ranging from 11 to 18 years old at all different stages of how practiced they are at being self-directed. We've got lifelong unschoolers that are at Big Fish. We've got kids that are just fresh off the bus from public school. Like, they were public school 2 weeks ago, and now they're trying to hang out and figure out what the best way to use their time is. And these kids at all these different stages in life, I think, are doing a really good job of challenging us there to really examine our principles, because I've worked in data for a lot of my life. And when you're working with small sample sizes, it's very easy to draw conclusions that are not accurate, right? And most parents are unfortunately working with a small sample size of just their own children. And your children are going to have their own particular, peculiarities, the things that they're very naturally adept at, the things that they naturally struggle with. And since those are the people you're working with every single day, it can be sometimes hard to see the forest for the trees, right? Like, your kid is thriving right now. Very easy to pat yourself on the back and be like, it's all because of what I did. Your kid is suffering. It's very easy to blame yourself, where the truth usually lies somewhere in between.
Yeah. And I think that you just made me think of something that I really want to say, which is, like, we're going to probably end up sharing some examples and stories, whether they're about our own kids or they're people that we have worked with, other children we've worked with. And I think what goes hand in hand with me talking about how there's no script for self-directed learning, there's also not like the model self-directed kid. And so when you hear these stories, I really want to make sure you understand that this might not be what your kid is doing, or this might not be exactly how your kid is operating in the world. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not thriving as a self-directed learner. Like, if they're thriving or not, if you need to tweak things in your life. But I think that, again, the public school, the traditional education paradigm sets it up so that all kids are supposed to be looking the same and doing the same and achieving the same things at the same time. And so when you listen to some of these stories or listen to our conversation, also just remember that kids who are truly supported to be self-directed are all going to engage with that and look so different in terms of what they're doing and when they're doing it and what they're not doing. Like even our kids, especially our two oldest, I'm mostly talking about right now, I think, I don't know if you agree with me, that they, as learners and people who are self-directed, completely do it differently than each other. So differently. And literally they're in the same exact home pretty much all day, every day. They each have some of their own stuff that they go out and do, but they engage with it so incredibly differently. And I'm actually really grateful for that because it has given me the perspective to see like that every kid's going to take it and run with it in a different way.
Yeah, that could be humbling for sure to see, well, especially if it tends to be your oldest, but you see them with one strategy for figuring it out. And then you're like, oh, you guys should also do this.
This is what it looks like.
Yeah, exactly. But it doesn't turn out to be that way. Actually, funny comments around the house yesterday. All the kids were upstairs on Mother's Day, playing sweetly and wrestling on the bed. And then Gus, our youngest, decided he was going to climb this little rock wall that we put up in their room. And he just like beasted it, climbed right to the top.
He just turned 3.
Yeah. And Ollie, our oldest, was like, man, Gus is insane at climbing for a 3-year-old. He's also kind of insane at Fortnite for a 3-year-old because Gus has been playing. I know. Sorry for Taylor for revealing that here on the podcast. And then he goes, I feel like we're all kind of like really good at the things that we like for our age. And I was like, oh yeah, that's great that you're feeling confident with that. And he goes, yeah, I think it's just because when we get into something, like we can just go with it. We can just keep doing it as long as we want. And then we can stop. And I thought that was like an interesting insight. I mean, it's something we've said before on the podcast, so it's not like a groundbreaking revelation or anything.
But for him to recognize that.
And I think the bigger thing is the fact, not so much that Gus is good at climbing, but the self-awareness of that process being an effective one, I think is one of the first tools I hope to equip the people I work with, right? Because I've seen the opposite, especially for kids that have had other people kind of picking their interests, and not only picking their interests, but picking the degree to which they should be interested. Like that can be one of the first impediments for personal growth towards being better at being self-directed, right? So I'll give an example. I think many episodes ago, we talked about someone whose kid was interested in guitar lessons, but only interested in going and taking the lessons themselves and playing like casually around the house, right? Wasn't interested in just grinding out an hour of practice a day.
And like sticking to like a regimented practice routine, like most private teachers would have you do.
Oh yeah, when I played an instrument growing up, that was like mandatory. And if
you
went in there and you hadn't, and it was obvious that you hadn't been practicing, you'd feel terrible.
I know. You just gave me, I just flashed back to when I was
walking in, they're like, play the piece you've been practicing.
Oh my gosh. I would literally take out my instrument, my viola in high school and practice right before my lesson for the first time the whole week. Yeah. Sorry, Mom.
Well, and you would be like, if your experience was like mine, you'd be anxious.
My heart would be racing. Oh, so bad.
And it would take all the joy out of it, right? Where for me, playing instruments when I was into it was something I really loved.
Totally.
Right? And it's funny because you can picture on the positive side, like there was a girl who came to our old camp who was super into a brass instrument, we'll say that. And so much of the motivation for her continuing to practice seemed to come from her parents. So she would come in and she would say things like, I really don't want to be practicing, but like, I know I need to. And I'd say like, you need to? And I wasn't trying to talk her out of it, like get her in trouble with her parents, but she would kind of indicate very plainly that she wasn't interested in it. And now it's funny because like, I don't know, maybe she looks back now and she's grateful for it. Like it's kind of hit or miss when you put kids on a path like that, where they're doing something specifically to gain your approval. One thing you must acknowledge in a situation like that is you've sort of unnaturally altered the course of the learning process there. And again, if your paradigm of education is that adults ought to alter the course, right, and they should be the ones who pick because they do know what's best and they can spot the talents and tell kids what they should be nurturing and what they should be ignoring, then okay, that's the premise you're starting with. I tend to not agree with that. Part of that is based on our experience with our kids, but also what I've seen at camp and at Big Fish and elsewhere. I've seen an incredible amount of positivity come from not only pursuing things as deeply as you want, but also setting things down the moment you want to also.
I think like the bigger outcome of that approach is that kids are able to develop a really, really true and deep level of self-knowledge and knowing who they are and understanding how to figure out what makes them excited and what they're passionate about. And to me, that's like a key element of lifelong happiness, right? Being able to understand what really fills you up for you and not because you are trying to meet other people's expectations of you. I also realized that when I had my little flashback to practice, I derailed your guitar story.
We landed on the same conclusions where it's just like when you pick when you're trying to guess as an outsider the exact amount that someone else should do something, you're just bound to be wrong.
Right, because I think we were encouraging that person, because they had asked for some ideas, I think we were encouraging that person to like support their kid to engage with the guitar in the way in which the kid really wanted to.
Well, yeah, because, and I think they ultimately wound up reflecting later on, like, oh yeah, this can just be something
they did,
that he engages, that he's joyful about to the degree that he wants. Because again, when you guess either way, like I think so many parenting concerns that I've heard basically amount to, my kid does this one thing too much or he does this one thing too little. And it's like, so it's too little math homework, too much video games, too little violin practice, too much hanging out with friends. And it's like, maybe you are not the person with the exact recipe of how much time should be spent.
And maybe your kid will spend their time in a way that they look back on and wish maybe hadn't been exactly the way they did. And that's also actually just giving them more information to inform their future decisions, especially if they have a non-judgmental grown-up in their life helping them process that, like from a place of love and support.
Yeah, and I would say too, it's just speaking personally as my experience, or in my experience as someone who's been pretty self-directed since college. I mean, basically worked for myself or at a job that I really wanted to work for someone else. I'll say that one of my biggest struggles is knowing when to put something down and when to pick up something new. Like, this is no criticism of my own upbringing, but I think it's just universal essentially, where it's like kids, you spend so little time practicing that skill.
They don't get to decide when to pick up and put
so
down.
Often, the habit becomes, I wanted to quit playing the violin 2 years before I actually did. But I kind of stuck it out longer because quitting is stigmatized and because I knew it would, or I felt, even if it wasn't true, I felt like it would be disappointing to these people who got really excited about my violin playing or whatever. And so you kind of get in the habit of doing something longer than your inner voice tells you to. And, you know, there's such a thing as resilience and there's such a thing as sticking through when things get hard. And I get all that. But if we're talking about the nuance of helping someone to learn how to be better at being self-directed, I think there's really good, valuable conversations that can come in those moments. It's like, I'll sit down. I have this one kid that I'm working with who wants to open an arcade someday. And we're running this video game convention at Big Fish where they're going to bring in their consoles and invite the public in to play these like retro video games and so on. And there are moments where it gets hard, right? I don't encourage them to quit because it's a hard moment, but they're still very obviously invested in the outcome.
There's enough motivation that they're willing to do like the harder, more annoying parts to get to the end goal.
But if I showed up at our meeting, we have a weekly meeting scheduled where I come and kind of essentially consult with them as they're trying to plan this. If I came in and like no one had made any progress, and when I asked questions like, well, how much should we charge? They just seemed kind of like listless and disinterested. Yeah. That's when I would start asking questions like, hey, we're not running this thing because you think I want to run it, right? Because if that's the case, then let's not do it. Let's
find a better use for your time if this is not an interest of yours.
Because we actually had a similar thing come up with a garden that we were starting at Big Fish, where I am super interested in gardening. A couple of the other staff members are too. There were like little nibbles early on from some of the kids. And so as the adults were like, oh, gardens. Woohoo! Yeah, this is cool. We're going to have an awesome garden here. And so we like get the stuff. And we're like, now you guys get the materials. I can't remember the exact details. But then they like kind of weren't. And they were kind of like tuned out and they didn't really seem to want to be going deeper on it. So like me, I love gardening. And I was really hoping we were going to have this like kick-ass garden where the kids were going to be interested in learning and I was going to learn stuff, but it kind of didn't materialize. And I had to really like take a breath and be like, okay, this isn't about me and my gardening.
You got your garden at home.
Right. That's a great point though. since it's not my own home,
Right.
I can return home and like get my garden on.
Right.
Got some more rose bushes that are going in soon.
Get that garden on, boy.
I'm gonna, don't worry. I'm ready. Spring is so good for that. But yeah, but like giving them this space to put it down, like it's back to the seen and the unseen. We see that they're not doing it now, and we can feel those feelings of disappointment. But we don't know where that's going to go in the future. We've actually had a similar experience with the piano.
I was going to bring that up.
Go.
Yeah, I'm going to go. So our 6.5, almost 7-year-old has been for a long time kind of, I think, on and off interested in music and musical instruments and all of that. So we've had instruments around the house quite a lot for a long time. And we've had a keyboard, like an electronic keyboard around the house for a long time that gets played on and off. But recently he started saying again, Mommy, will you learn the guitar with me? Or Mommy, I want to learn to play the piano. So a while ago, you and him had explored this app called Simply Piano.
Yeah, sponsored, by the way, for this podcast.
Yeah, it's actually really cool. So that helps you learn to play. And so this was a few months ago. Our son played through like the free components of it and enjoyed it. And then we had to pay for more. So we kind of talked about if we were going to do it or not. And then I think we kind of forgot about it for a little while. He didn't ask much, but then just recently he started asking again. So we decided to do like the 7-day free trial, and that would just roll into like a year-long subscription. So we set that up, and the first day he probably spent a total of over 3 hours on it, like throughout the day at different times. Some of the time I was sitting with him, helping him. Other times he was doing it on his own. He did get super frustrated at times, but he also kept going back to it. And over the next few days, he did it quite a bit each day. And then it kind of dwindled a little bit for him, his interest. He said it got hard. I did talk to him about it because we wanted to know before the 7 days was up, like, should we cancel this subscription or not? Because it is pretty expensive. Not expensive, but it was more than we want to spend if he's not going to use it. And he said, like, yeah, maybe I could use a little help, but I'm just not sure I'm so interested anymore. And so ultimately, and I don't know if the old me would have been able to do this, I really had to talk myself down in my head because I still have these tapes that play like, oh, piano is like a super valuable interest. And I really want him to keep up with this. This is so awesome. But he just kind of wanted to set it down. And so we ultimately just decided to cancel it and not roll into the part that we had to pay for a whole year. And we also just said, like, we can go back and purchase this at any time if he becomes interested again. And for me, I really did have the urge to like encourage him and try to convince him to keep going with it, because it was so fun to hear him learning this new skill. And it was fun for me because I know how to play the piano and I really could help him, but we had to let it go. And also know, like you were just saying, James, that who knows where it'll go in the future. Like, he's had this exposure. It's planted a seed. He may or may not pick it up again, but he definitely has some more skills around the piano. He knows some more. He can sit down and do a few things, and he can read
music, basically.
Yeah, he can kind of read music, like, and he can go back to it if he wants to, and we'll keep looking for like those sparks of interest and try to be aware of them. And also, like, I think we probably could have, well, because he's so used to being self-directed, he probably would have heavily resisted any convincing and cajoling, which is good, which I would want him to do. But it was definitely a lesson again in like letting go of my, like, what I thought would be the ideal path for him and letting him be the one in charge.
Well, right. And I think this is back to I feel like an undercurrent of this whole discussion for me is like the hidden lessons or the hidden things that kids learn throughout this whole process. Because again, there's a scenario where you do press it and you are able to convince him to stick with the piano and keep doing it. And so he keeps developing skills around the piano, and that's great. Skills around the piano can be useful. It teaches the brain all sorts of things to read music and so on. We've all seen the research. Mm-hmm. But what's the hidden lesson there? That's the question I would always ask myself. Is it, well, when I come on the brink of quitting something, I'll know if I should continue because someone will intercede and keep pushing me toward it, right? Mm-hmm. Like, say he turns into a world-class pianist based on you pushing him over that little hump. There's still a part there where he would develop self-talk around needing to be pushed over that hump. Mm. And I think that's such a it's such a tricky thing to quantify.
Like needing an outside source to kind of get him there.
Yeah, and if it was really literally a single slight nudge, then that would be one thing. But
I think he had that slight nudge. Like I definitely was, are you sure you don't want to sit, I did try to at least double check.
Well, yeah, and I think double checking is fine.
Yeah, me too.
But again, we're back in the territory of figuring out how far do we go with those conversations before our children are starting to feel like, okay, now I'm in a position where I know mom will approve of me more if I keep playing
I know
piano.
what answer she's looking for.
Exactly. And then you put your child or the child in your care in a position where they have to make that call. They have to think, do I stick with this thing that I don't really want to do to please my parents, or do I walk away from it and displease them, even if it's slightly, right? But that dilutes the self-directed learning process because you're introduced a different variable that hopefully, I think we would all agree, hopefully won't be there forever, right? Like heaven forbid your kid should be 29 and trying to decide to stay at their job or leave it. And then this has happened.
I know.
I'm
agreeing. Saying, that is not
but then the thought creeps in, would mom be disappointed if I quit this job?
I've had adults tell me that. They're still making their decisions based on how they think their parents will perceive their decisions.
Right. And that's, I think we would all agree. If you're listening to this podcast, I would guess you agree. You probably don't want that, right? So I think, again, we're dancing that line. Encouragement versus support. Creating dependency versus helping connect the dots for kids. And I think this is, when we talk about the nuances of self-directed learning, this is another thing I keep landing on. So we're back at this gaming convention, right? The kids that are there at Big Fish decided they wanted to throw this gaming convention, and they're like, yeah, we're going to do a gaming convention. Now, running an event that's open to the public that you're going to charge money for is a pretty complicated thing. And if your kids in this group, mostly aging between like 11 and 16, that's a lot. It's a lot to take on, and it can be helpful to have someone there and saying, hey, you want to do this huge thing. I've run businesses before. Do you want me to be a part of this discussion? And like offer that invitation in the same way when I took a job at running at summer camps, I called other people who had run camps and asked them questions, right?
Right.
When I became a parent, I talked to people I respect who are parents and heard their input. So, and I think this is the really fine line piece where it's like, there's a big difference between a kid is trying to work on something and like very obviously is chewing on it and like could use some help versus like a kid wants to do something. It seems hard for a minute. So you rush in to help and kind of tell them, okay, well, this is what we're going to need to do. First, we create our task board. Now we're going to assign tasks. Lily, you do this. Tyler, you do this. Right. And I think this is like, and I hope to have a conversation about where that line is, at least for us right now, between jumping in and saying like, oh, you want this thing in the distance, and then you hold their shoulders and you start marching them in that direction, versus like, oh, you think that you want that thing in the distance. How to get there is kind of foggy. Do you want help navigating this?
Right. Because I think that if we get excited about a goal that our kids or the kids we're working with have, especially based on everything that we've ever known about helping kids achieve their goals, we really run the risk of kind of co-opting the whole thing. And I think I've seen it kind of suck the joy out of it for kids. Yeah. And like you said, I think it starts to teach them, like, you aren't really, like, you need a ton of direction to accomplish your goals instead of some support. So before we were talking, you were talking about what it looks like to like support kids through kind of asking them open-ended questions and helping them figure out their next best steps. Maybe you could say a little bit about that. Yeah,
I mean, I think
you were using Ollie as an example, but
well, sure. So I think essentially it's this moment where, so I guess the fundamental difference I'm picturing, again, I'm back to being an adult, is I'm interested in something. Okay. I'm sort of making this known to the world. Like, let's say I was starting my first business. Now, if my friend called me up and was like, oh, hey, you're starting your own business. I've started my own business. Here's what you need to do. I'd be like, I don't know. Like,
or they even started like doing the steps for you. They were like, here, I'll go register your LLC. And
Right. I mean, and that would be overtly like, obviously not the right thing, but even on the softer level, even like that kind of like, have you ever had a friend who like takes kind of a know-it-all-ish tone about something you're wanting to get into? I have. And it's just unpleasant. Like, and I can deal with it. I know it comes from a well-intentioned place. I don't really harbor a lot of resentments.
But
or
it almost
grudges.
like steals the beauty of discovery for you too.
It can. I mean, and again, like, I think that's just so different then. Now you're in that spot. And now you're like, oh, my friend Tony started a business. I should call Tony. Like, now I go to Tony and I'm like, hey, Tony, you're such a great businessman. I'm trying to get into business. Like, any like pitfalls you would have hoped to avoid starting your first business, like that interaction is so completely different then. Because, and so here's the reason why I think because when Tony comes to me and is like, here's the things you shouldn't do and you should do, it's really hard to not sort of take that personally and be like, Tony just thought I was going to mess this up, you know? And even if that's not Tony's intention, Tony doesn't feel that way. He just wants to help, right? Whenever you're getting unsolicited advice or encouragement, it's kind of just like, yeah, I think I was kind of doing okay here.
And I think certain people will give us that feedback more than others. Like one of our kids,
Right.
for example, like the minute you give him a piece of unsolicited advice or feedback, the minute
it's rough.
anyone does, like you wish you hadn't, right? And that can be hard in the moment, but I also really appreciate how
There's openness.
I appreciate, like how clearly he sends the message of like, yeah, I didn't ask you for advice. Because he will ask sometimes, but when he doesn't ask, he doesn't want it. And I think that it's really important to respect that. I think people who are listening and just heard what you said about like you and your friend Tony might be able to identify. And I can guess that the question that might come up in some people's heads is like, but what if it's a kid? Mm-hmm. Because kids just have less life experience. They don't have as many skills. They don't have as many connections, right? So I really think that what you were saying about like Ollie's stated dream of earning money playing video games someday, like if you could just talk about how you kind of are in the process right now of like asking him questions to help him think through like how he might get there someday.
Well, sure. So I don't mean to like dodge this question, but I think there's just more to it before we get to that moment. So
okay.
I think there's also the piece where Ollie is sitting there and he is obviously like dreaming on this thing. And so when you have your own child in your home with you, you're going to have a much cleaner sense of what it is they're struggling with, what's just not making sense, what seems overwhelming than you
just
would
know them so well
with a friend, right? So like if Tony and I share a co-working space and I'm sitting there saying things aloud like, oh, making a website's impossible. How does anyone do this? Like that's sort of an indication that I might want some help with that, right? Because as soon as I've declared something that it can't be done, now I've probably invited in someone saying, well, actually it can, you know, like, hey, it's actually not as hard as you think, right? But in that case, I have made myself vulnerable in some capacity. And if other people are reading my body language and my verbal language properly, they can make a pretty decent calculation on that. But that would be, again, it'd be much different if Tony walks into the co-working space, sees I've got a WordPress backend opened up, and he's like, ooh, WordPress, you have to use elegant themes. That's like the only theme thing where you're like, okay, Tony, I get it, dude. Like you've made a website. We all understand. And so if Ollie were trying to pursue becoming a video game player as a living, I don't even know if he wants to pursue that, but as the example here, I would start by not talking about it at all. I would be paying attention to how he is spending his time, seeing what he's working on, seeing what the problems he's facing are, and seeing how he's working through those problems. Because even if it's hard, but he seems like he's making progress.
Right.
One of the key indicators that I look for is this person about to give up on something? If someone's about to give up on something, and they're essentially stating, whether verbally or through body language or actions or whatever, I can't do this. I think that's an appropriate time to come in and say, hey, at some point you were really interested in trying to pursue this. Now you seem like you're wanting to step away from it. Ooh, do you want some help? And I think that's an okay time, whether it's a grown up or a kid, because they're closing that door, right? So they're not like, out there shooting hoops and you're like coming in there, grabbing their arms and putting them in the right motion. You're instead saying like, hey, a few weeks ago, you were like dead set on starting a thriving YouTube channel. Today, I noticed you haven't done anything with that in a couple of days. Like, what's up? And they might say, oh yeah, I just realized like making the YouTube videos, that process I just find tedious, like with the tags and the titles. Like I realize that's not actually how I want to enjoy this. Then you say, great. And then you move on. But if they're like, I just literally couldn't figure out how to get my files the right size to upload. And then you're like, oh, okay, here, that's something I can connect with. So it's more like, so I think that's one of the first things I would look for. Person has a goal. Their goal seems to have changed. I would want to find out why. That would be my step one.
Okay.
Great. You want more?
Well,
I can keep talking if you want.
Well, what do you think about... So I think this is something that I wonder about and we may have a different opinion on, but I often also, especially with kids, like let's say I do have a kid expressing a ton of interest in something, right? Okay. I would probably intervene sooner than you're saying, just in the sense of making sure, like if I was aware of a super helpful resource, I would want them to know about it. Just like a simple statement of, oh, you've been really interested in learning to do a backflip. Like, here's an example from our life, right? I found this great YouTube channel that gives tutorials. Do you want me to send you the link to it? Or do you want to watch some videos with me? Or like I did, this is actually a real life example. Our friend has been a professional gymnastics teacher and mentioned that she would love to give you some pointers or help spot you as you practice backflips. Is that something you'd be interested in? So just at least like for me, I feel like part of, and I could be wrong about this, but I feel like part of my responsibility as the parent of a self-directed child, especially for how young he is to at least make him aware of what I perceive to be really good resources that could help him achieve his goal, and then not to push it, like to let him know that these things are available. Are you interested? Yes or no? And then to go forth from there. Yeah,
I think that's totally appropriate, actually. And I think that's where, again, a lot of the nuance comes in, where I think, again, the simple exercise of putting yourself in the shoes
that's helpful.
Of the learner.
Yeah, because I would appreciate that.
Yeah, like if I'm sitting there and someone knows that I'm getting into gardening, and they send me a link and it's like the 15 best native plants that grow in New Hampshire. I'm not going to be like, I was going to find that list, like, I think that's like pointing someone in the direction of resources, I think is rarely taken as a personal attack.
So to you, that's different than like unsolicited advice.
I think it'd be much different if our friend came over and just marched over the
got
trampoline.
On the trampoline with him.
It's like, whoa.
Okay.
You're going to need some
So it's like, it's almost like a different variation of like getting consent, right? Like you're like, I'm aware of this resource. Would you like to tap into it?
And in fact, that's actually, I think, just a positive because it's a moment of connection. It's communicating to someone, I see that this is something you're interested in. I'm also not taking an interest in it and trying to learn more about it.
I'm here to support you. Yeah. I see you. I see what you're interested in.
Yeah. And then you like point them to it, and then you just leave it to them. If they find it interesting, they'll probably want to talk to you about it. If they ignore it, then that's fine too. Yeah. And I think that's totally appropriate. And again, I think that's like where this all gets so nuanced. Like, I think if you're reading the body language of the person involved, you'll oftentimes know right away how the resource was received as well. So like, you can always try something once. Like, we're not mind readers. And if because some people might even resist that. And then that's okay. Then you say, okay, this person is not receiving my intended help very well. Awesome. Just walk away. Yeah. Just go do something else.
Yeah,
right?
That makes sense.
And I think that's good. And I think, again, it points me back to this also nuanced thing where it's like, I just keep going back in my mind to this idea of creating a dependency for certain types of help versus the person being able to pursue the help, developing the skill of pursuing help, I guess is what I want to say. Because sometimes, like one of the most useful skills I have developed over the course of my self-directed learning process is knowing when to look for help, whether it's online videos or a mentor.
Right, like knowing when you had to look outside of yourself to get to the next step.
Exactly right.
Or take the next step, yeah.
And so I do want to be a little bit careful about always being the resource man, where it's like this person is just trying to pursue something and I'm the guy who shows up every day with like, and now here's the next lesson plan for the day sort of thing, or like, here's the place you should turn next. So I think there is a potential to overdo it where the person then, because then there's always like, if you do something every day for someone, one day they're going to wake up. And if you don't do that thing for them, they're going to feel confused, right? If you make breakfast for someone every day, then one day you're just not willing to do it. They're going to be like, oh, I got to make my own breakfast. I was kind of like relying on you to be the person who made the breakfast. So it's not to say you can't wean someone off of that, but it's just good to be aware that's sort of the dynamic, you know?
Maybe there's a piece of it too then that's really important, which I think we try to do, which is like modeling the process of self-directed learning and speaking aloud about our own processes so that our kids start to internalize that. Does that make sense? Yeah. So like if I'm trying to learn something new or to solve some problem or gain some new skill, like letting my kids into that process just by simply, you know, mentioning it when we're having a meal together or telling them like, they're like, oh, Mom, you're going out. Where are you going? Oh, I'm going to meet with somebody who's going to help me figure out what I need to do to like take my business in the direction I want it to go.
Right.
So like letting them have little windows into our own learning process so that we're not just like, just putting resources in front of them and then they're not seeing that we're doing the same exact things in our own lives. So maybe there's a piece of that that's really valuable. Or I liked what you were saying before we started. That's what I was like trying to pull out of you as far as like the Ollie and the video gaming and the YouTubing, which was like, you kind of talked about a little bit of like this, it's like almost like a parallel to the Socratic method. It was like asking him questions like, oh, like so you think you might want to make money playing video games someday. Okay. So this is what you were saying. Like, what do you notice that all people who make video games or play video games for money have in common? And he says, oh, they're all really, really good. And then you say to him, well, yeah, they're all really, really good, but there's probably plenty of people who are great who aren't making money off of it. So what do you think makes those people different? And it's like, you talked about how you just keep asking questions to help him get to figure out like what his next best step is going to be that's appropriate for like where he is in his life and his age and his interests and his skills. And that is a way, I think, of helping people internalize that process of being like self-directed. It's like asking questions instead of telling him or suggesting the next step.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's still being helpful without creating a dependency because it puts the onus on the learner to think through and do the research, right? So and almost like you're approaching it from a place of curiosity where like
totally
it's especially nice if you just don't know where you're like
you're kind of figuring it out together
and you're like, I don't know, this guy is just incredible at aiming in video games. Well, how do you think he got that way? Legitimately curious. And you're like learning, you're like, oh, there's this aim training program and there's this whole aim training routine. And like, you're by being curious and modeling that curiosity and asking those questions for yourself, then your kids they'll probably start asking themselves the same questions.
Exactly.
And I love what you said too about kind of modeling, looking for help also. This actually happened yesterday where we were at this gardening center, or it wasn't a garden center. It was like this insane garden. And they were selling some of the plants that they have in their garden as like a spring sale to raise some money. And I saw a guy there who had the name tag on of like garden director. And I was like,
did it say garden director?
Yeah.
I was wondering why you called him that. I was like, you just went and asked him if he's the garden director, but now I get it.
Reading from distances without your glasses, not your strong
You're right.
suit, let's be honest.
I probably didn't even notice he had a name tag on.
Yeah, it's just all one shirt and kind of a fuzzy gold outline around one part. But I was like, so I walked over and I just started like asking him the deep questions about like his pruning the roses when he does it, how deep, how thick, whatever. And I've read websites about pruning roses. I took master gardener classes. Like I'm not unqualified to prune some roses. But when I meet somebody who I know is much, much better and more knowledgeable than me, I'm going to ask them questions. And actually, Ollie said something to me later where he was like, you talked about that guy with the roses for like a long time. Like I thought you already knew how to plant roses or something. And I was like, well, I know a lot, but like not nearly as much as him. And when I meet someone who knows that much more than me, I'm just going to take the opportunity.
I just like see his awesome thriving rose garden and he's right there. Yeah,
exactly. And I don't need to like take it personally that he's better at gardening roses than me. Like I have the confidence that I think if I actually applied my whole life to growing roses, I could probably grow some pretty damn good roses. But modeling humility around
what you don't know.
Yeah, because I think in our culture, especially like YouTube culture, Twitter culture, like there's all this bravado out there. And I've seen it in areas where I've spent a lot of time. Like I remember in poker, it was this way where half the battle to becoming known almost was like acting like you know it all. And I find that to be so exceedingly unhelpful in my own personal growth. And I've also seen from knowing some people like that, when you reach the top of certain industries, like you get to know the people with the most bravado. And oftentimes they're just like wildly insecure and like projecting that while in the background hustling super hard to try to get their skills to match their own
to like
reputation. Yeah. But they also have like huge imposter syndrome. Like it's just something I've observed. And
so modeling being able to like be honest with ourselves about where we are in terms of our knowledge about something, and like the just pure value of finding an expert and seeking their knowledge and learning from them.
Sure. And modeling the humility around like even the things you're best at, there's probably people better than you.
Totally.
Probably more you can learn. And the goal for me, if we're back on the modeling thing, I don't really have a goal to be the best at any given pursuit. I am pursuing a goal of trying to be the best at figuring out how to be the best. Where, and that's what education is, right? It's like, or to be better, to put differently, to have a more attainable goal, where I want to be every day in there. Like I want my kids to see me with goals, with things I'm pursuing, where they can say like, well, at the very least, even if it's not my thing, my dad is willing to sit down and suck at something for a while.
Yeah.
Because they see all the things I know how to do. I mean, I know how to juggle. I'm pretty good at juggling. They didn't see the hours I spent throwing balls up in the air, like looking like I have two left hands. Like, and so like there's this myth when you're a kid of like your parents being superheroes or adults having it figured all out. I think dispelling that myth as quickly as possible via being curious, being humble, failing at stuff. I think that actually is a huge catalyst to the self-directed learning process too.
I think so too. And it's interesting because I've realized that because we are both kind of self-directed in our own work and we're both entrepreneurs of our own in our own ways, that is just like a natural way that our kids end up seeing us kind of fail at things and mess up and have to learn something new. And Yeah,
it's funny because there is a natural appeal to wanting to feel like a superhero to your own kids. Mm-hmm. And I remember, I think it was Fiona Griffin from one of our earlier episodes, where she was talking about how, one of her clients, she's a therapist, had these like on paper, like insanely great parents. But one of the worst things they unintentionally did for their daughter was making it seem like they all had it figured out.
Right.
Because then the daughter was in this perpetual state of like, why am I just this failure who never has it all figured out?
Right. Because you get to be an adult and you realize no one had it all figured out. Or you don't. Right. Or you think everybody did, and then there's something wrong with you because you don't.
And I'm thinking of the first like year or so I was a parent, and this constant state of disbelief I was in, walking around in public and seeing people with like 3 kids at the grocery store.
And we're like,
and being
okay.
Like, how does this person have this figured out? Like, this is the hardest thing I've ever done.
They're still alive. Okay.
I'm like a total fraud. I've worked with kids my whole life. I can't make it through the first year of parenting without wanting to give up. And in reality, those people are back at home, like, getting angry, fighting with their partner about this or that and the other. Like, everyone has got their own secret baggage. And so with my own kids, I want to paint as accurate a picture as possible, without going overboard. You don't want to.
Yeah, but you want them to see us as real people with challenges. And
that's it.
Yeah.
Well said.
Boom.
Cool. Well, I don't know, man. This turned out to be a longer topic than I would have anticipated. I think there's even more we could have said. Yeah,
this is for sure like a bit of a deeper exploration than some of our other episodes. So I think it will be interesting to all of you, and especially maybe those of you who are who are kind of at some point in a self-directed learning journey already with your kids and your family. And what I think is cool is I think this episode will really be applicable to those of you who have older kids too.
And I was going to say, I think it will be applicable across all parenting approaches, because
you would say that.
I think, I believe it in this case. I'm not lying when I say that. I think it's true because I think at some point, no matter what your educational approach is, if you're raising kids in the year 2019 or later, if you're listening to this in the future, you probably hope for your kid to become better at being self-directed in the future. So whatever other things are in their life, whether it's school or homeschooling, doesn't really matter. These principles, I think, still apply. So Hopefully you took away something from it.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us on this journey. And remember that each moment is a new opportunity to be the parent that you hope to be.
Love you guys. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to One Free Family. If you enjoy the podcast, please show your support by becoming a patron at onefreefamily.com/support. Your support will help make this show better. Plus, you can get access to rewards and additional episodes by joining. Again, that's onefreefamily.com/support. This has been a Pax Libertas Productions podcast.